Hello again, this is Andrew Klein with video 2 of my compositing videos series. This video we're going to take a look at the difference between render passes and render layers. We're going to cover some of the basics of shader overrides, render settings, and how to associate our different passes to render layers. So in this basic video, what I have is this scene with a couple of objects. I've got this torus shape, this little jack or X-shaped thing. I've got this goofy flag that's a little bit ripped up here, and it's got an alpha essentially cutting it out. You can see the polygon shape of this. Again, a kind of simple little scene which I've already rendered. I've got a glass material that I created for this torus. Just a reflective orange blin on this piece, and then my little flag cut out right there. You'll notice that my scene has a curved backdrop for a render environment. I've got a couple of lights here, including several different lighting elements to do three-point lighting. I've got this spotlight, which I'm using as sort of a primary light source. This light is casting ray trace shadows. I have fill lights and other sort of spotlights and point lights here for the background just to kind of create full illumination. And I'm just going to temporarily turn all of that visibility off, or selectability off, I should say. And I want to get started with this. So what I have, this is a base render. This is my master layer, oftentimes referred to as a master beauty image. And it has a couple of interesting parts, which is why I've set up this demo in the weird way that I have it. I have this glass piece. Now it is obviously transparent, but it has refractivity to it, and there are going to be some interesting properties that come along with transparent objects when I do that rendering. I also have this, victory banner. I could see this being used in a game environment or something like that. Just a quick texture I created. I ripped it out, and you'll see that shadows are also cut out as well. Just one note about cutting out shadows like this when using Mental Ray. You have to make sure that you're using a Mental Ray shadow shader to be able to cut out the shadow properly. The shadow shader demo that I have, which is a written demo, you can find at www.andrewklein.net/bh/mr photon and shadow.html. You can also find this if you go to my main teaching website, which is kleinmakelearngood.com. You can go to my tutorials page, and you'll find the Mental Ray Photon and Shadow Shaders demo right there. That kind of instructs you how to create the cutout shadow that I have. Now, just to kind of show you the textures that are being used in this scene, I have a color map with a alpha channel using to cut out that little flag. And I have a transparency map, which is the exact same identical thing as that little shadow. So this is all important for a couple of reasons. I want to be able to talk about this as we go, because I'm going to use this as a way to sort of get into basic occlusion later on. We're going to come back to this tutorial in video 6, 7, and 8. But before I go any further here, let's take a look at the difference between render passes and render layers. So inside of our Maya environment, I have the channel box open, and I currently have my display layers tab open. I'm going to switch this to render layers, and you'll see currently everything right now is on a master render layer. So everything I render is rendered through this master layer. Now at render time, I can actually separate out the different elements of what we see here into separate images. And all the things that it's already rendering on the master layer, I can have broken out. This is the idea of a render pass. I can take all of the elements that I already have rendered, that are already being calculated when I render, I should say, and break those up into separate elements. Now this can be done actually pretty simply, and I'm going to do a very basic version of this right now. So I'm on my master layer. I'm going to go to the render settings window, which is the clackboard with the two circles on it on the status line, and open up my render settings window. In the passes tab, right here, you'll notice I currently have no scene passes. There are no passes in my scene to be used. Well, I am going to click on the top icon here in that render passes tab. To me, that looks like it's a clackboard with an explosion happening behind it. Click on that top element, and this is going to give me a list of available render passes. Now, render passes, as I said, are all things that Mental Ray is already calculating when you render for the most part. It's just going to separate these elements out. So let's just try a couple of these and you'll see what we're able to get. I'm going to try a direct irradiance render pass. I am going to try a specular render pass. So I'm holding down Command on a Mac, or I can use Shift or Control, on a PC to select multiple render passes here. I can use the reflection render pass, add that to my selection. What else? How about the diffuse render pass? And let's see here. Trying to see if there are any other ones that we might want to utilize as a good sort of starting point. That should actually be pretty good. Well, let's see what these do. So I've got these render passes selected. I'm just going to choose create and close. Now that's going to create these passes in the scene. I've got diffuse, direct irradiance, reflection, and specular. They're now here in the scene, but they're not associated with anything yet. They're here, but they're not used. This is the same thing as, if you go into the Hypershade window, rendering editors, Hypershade, and let's say I made a blin. Say this is like a green blin. I've made this blin in the scene, but it's not really assigned to anything yet. It's here, but it's not being used. Just like with assigning a material where I'd have to select an object and then middle mouse drag that material on, I have to kind of do the same thing here with our render passes. So to get this assigned, make sure you're on the render layer of your choice, and I only have one render layer right now, my master layer, so I have that selected. I'm going to select all of these render passes by just holding down Shift to select them, and I'm going to click on this little link button right here to associate the selected passes with the current layer. And now I've got all of these render passes created. Now let's hit close, and I can do two things at this point. If I just re-render my image, let's go ahead and do this. My single frame renderer is actually going to create these render passes for me. We'll wait for this to do its deal. I can also batch render to get these out, and I'll take a look at that in just a second. All right, so this was 22 seconds to render. I didn't save down the previous render, but I did check the time on it. It previously took 18 seconds to render out the first image. So this was, all told, 4 seconds longer to generate out these extra elements. These passes can be found by going to File, Load Render Pass. And if you do a render, a single frame render, when you're using render passes, you'll be able to see these. Here's my direct irradiance pass. Apparently, you should be able to see these at least. Let's see if it put them here on my desktop. Okay, they're here on my desktop. It's just deciding not to open them up into the Maya environment. And they appear not to be opening here either. Let's see if I can get F-check to open them. Okay, there we go. There's my diffuse image in F-check. You'll notice that because they're rendering out as IFFs, my computer was just having a hard time pulling them open for some reason. I'm sorry about that. My diffuse image doesn't really have anything here for this glass piece because the material for that is not really diffuse at all. The diffuse is kind of turned way down, so this is very dark. Almost everything that you're seeing is reflectivity and refractivity. Here's my direct irradiance image. Let me just close out of all these other windows that are open. Here's my direct irradiance. This is showing me just where my light is, without any of the other material elements. It gives me a master beauty image by default, which is the image that I rendered, that I want to see. That's my master image. It gives me a reflections image, which is just the reflected elements. And it gives me a specular image, which is just the specular highlights. Now I could essentially use these, take the reflections, the specularity, the diffuse, and I can put all of these back together to really just remake my master beauty image. And the ability of separating all this out is going to allow me to recolor and change all of these parts individually. So that's one way to test your render passes. The other way is to simply do a batch render, which makes sure you have set your project first under File, Set Project, so you know where your images are going. But I could just choose Render, Batch Render. It's going to do a quick save of my file. I'll just open up my script editor here while this does its thing. This way I can watch the progress of my batch render. 15%, 20%, 30%. You can watch it going. This is another way to generate out those individual images. And when this is done, we'll be able to kind of see those as well. So let's go over here. All of the images that I created now, instead of being in a temp folder when I do my single frame render, they are placed into individual folders, such as, again, here's my diffuse image, and I should not have closed out of Fcheck. Here's my diffuse image again. You can see the other ones would be pretty much set up as is. You'll notice, though, that it rendered out from a different camera angle this time. So previously it rendered from here for my single frame render. Here it rendered out from a different camera angle. What actually happened is that my batch render was just rendering from the perspective camera instead of from my designated render camera. And the reason for that is that in my render settings window, under the Common tab, if I scroll down, my renderable camera had been set to perspective instead of my rendering camera. So I'll just go ahead and change that right now and save my scene. And I could re-render this, but you probably get the idea. You know, that is a look at these render passes. They're all things that are associated with an already existing render layer, and they take what's already there and they break it up for you so you can use those separately. And we looked at how we can do this with the single frame renderer, which will use the camera of your choice. I had just gone to renderer, render, rendering camera here, which is why I got it from the correct angle. And we saw how if I did a batch render, I just have to make sure I choose the correct renderable camera in my render settings window. So that's our render passes. We can also make separate render layers, and I want to take a few minutes and just kind of show you some examples of different render layers that we can do. Now, render layers work like this. You can take anything that you want in your viewport. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my elements are selectable again. I had made a hands-off layer here just so I can keep things hidden temporarily. I'm just going to go ahead and select everything here in my viewport first. And once I have every object and every light and all my cameras selected, in my render layers, I'm going to click the icon, which is a blue ball on top of a white plane with a little explosion behind it. That creates a new render layer and adds the selected elements to that render layer. This is going to be called Layer 1. I can double click on this and rename it whatever I want. Let's just call it Test 1 for right now. I'm going to make a couple of different render layers and we'll see what these are all doing. You'll notice that my little clackboards in the render layers section have different icons right now. My master layer has a little red X on it, and my new test 1 layer has a little green checkbox. If I click on the green checkbox, it'll also be a red X, and right now none of my layers will render when I hit batch render. If I turn both to green, they'll both render when I hit batch render. And again, if I just uncheck the master layer, only my test layer is going to render. Now here's what's cool. In a render layer, you can actually do things that didn't exist in the previous master layer. So whereas a render pass can only show you elements that it was already rendering, in a new render layer, we can make new things that have not yet been created. So let's try this. I'm going to reopen my Hypershade, which has opened on my second monitor, so I'm just going to move this over here. Remember that green blend that I'd created? Well, why don't I assign the green blend to my jack piece here in this render layer? And you'll notice that in my master layer, it'll render out orange. In this test 1 layer, it's going to render out green. So what we call this is a shader override. Essentially, I've said that in this layer, give me a different shader. I could select my glass piece, for instance, and let's go to its attributes. Maybe in this render layer, I want to change some of the properties of a shader. Well, let's do this. In my transparency section, I'm going to hold down right-click on the word transparency, and I'm going to choose Create Layer Override from the menu. This is going to make my words orange, and I'll just turn my transparency down. Let's make my specular color, again I'll right click to create a layer override. Let's make my specular color like a cyan blue. Let's go into the diffuse and create a layer override. And let's turn up the diffuse. And let's go into my color and create a layer override. And let's make it like a deep purpley blue here. And you can see what I've actually done are individual layer property overrides in this, so that if I go back to my master layer, it's transparent. In my test layer, it's been given completely different visual properties. Well, what else can I do? I could also say, what if I only want my spotlight in this master layer? Maybe I only want the spotlight and maybe like one other light. Maybe I don't want these other lights, these 3 other fill lights that I have to be in this layer. Maybe I can exclude individual elements from this layer. So in this case, I'm going to select these and just right click on my test layer and say remove selected objects, and they'll be gone and they won't even render when I render out this layer. Maybe I don't want my flag as well. And select my flag, remove them from the layer. Now this could of course work 2 ways. When I initially selected everything for this layer in the master layer, I could have also just not selected these elements. I could have just removed these from the selection before I created anything. That would have had pretty much the exact same effect. But you can do this at the beginning or later on if you so desire. So I've gone ahead and I've removed objects from this element. What about my lights? In my light, maybe I can go into my light property and create a layer override. Maybe because I don't have as many lights here in this scene, maybe I want to create an intensity override by right-clicking and turning up the intensity to 20. And maybe I can change the color of my light to be, well, I don't know, maybe more red-orange here in this scene. And you'll notice that back in my master layer, it's a yellower, less intense light, and here in my layer 1, it's going to be a redder, more intense light. Now, all of the properties that you have in Maya can be changed this way. In my render settings window, I could go into my features tab, for instance, as soon as my render settings open, and I could turn on or off final gathering or global illumination in these layers. I could turn on and off ray tracing. In my quality tab, I could change my sample values in these layers. There's a whole bunch of properties that you can change. Pretty much anything that you can think of in Maya, you can create a layer override for. And this gives you the ability to render out something new. You can also, in my passes, I can also associate passes to these render layers. So I have my same passes as before. Maybe this time around, let's just associate the reflection and specular passes to this test layer. So I am going to associate them in so that on test 1, it'll give me my master beauty, plus it'll also break out these 2 passes. On my master layer, it's going to give me all of them. And you can actually reuse these passes. All it is, it's not an individual element, it's just a little flag saying that, hey, do this specific task when you render this layer. So you can repeat those tasks and reuse those tasks. You don't have to make multiple reflection passes and associate them all individually. I'm just going to go to my comment tab here, and I've been rendering this out as IFF. I'm just going to switch this very quickly to JPEG for my next batch render, just so this will render out and I can open this properly. I will close that. I'm going to make sure that both of these render layers are visible by clicking the little green checkbox for those. And here, let's just delete out all of the images that I've been using previously. So I've got a new place to start off with. And now let's just do one more batch render and we'll see how this looks. I'll go to Render, Batch Render, and open up my script editor so I can check the progress. I often find myself batch rendering with these techniques because it allows me to just make sure I have them all in designated folders as opposed to having them go into that temp directory. So first, this is going to render out my master layer with my master beauty pass. That's what you see it's doing first. It's at 50%, 60%. So it's going to start at the bottom and then work its way upwards with whatever ones are checked. So now it's doing my test render layer, and it's going to create that element. There we go. So let's see how this looks. In my images folder, what I'm going to have now are two subdirectories. One is going to be called master layer, and you'll notice here's my diffuse, here's my director radiance. This is all the same stuff as before, all these individual images. But in my test layer, I also have some individual things. Here's my render settings overrides. You can see my red or light. All the other lights are gone. My properties have changed. My material has changed. I did not include this flag. And my reflections pass is now updated to reflect the change in lighting and the change in materials. My specular pass just the same. So what we see here is the ability to control elements that you're already creating and any new elements that you desire. This has been an overview of render passes and render layers, and this was video 2. Please stay tuned for video 3, where we're going to take a look at how to apply this to make some very specific set decisions in an actual animated shot. So video 3 coming right up.